This stuff, it was exceptionally hard, maybe even harder than a traditional animation. You're working with an unknown artist in the room who can give you exactly what you want, or who can give you some random wonderfulness or some, as other people say, grotesque image. So it's a huge challenge. In order for it to be good, there needs to be like a big 500-foot human vision.
Hello, and welcome to the Cognitive Revolution, where we interview visionary researchers, entrepreneurs, and builders working on the frontier of artificial intelligence. Each week, we'll explore their revolutionary ideas, and together we'll build a picture of how AI technology will transform work, life, and society in the coming years. I'm Nathan Lebenz, joined by my co-host, Eric Torenberg. Hello, and welcome back to the Cognitive Revolution. Today, I'm thrilled to be speaking with my longtime friends and teammates, Stephen Parker and Josh Rubin, creative leads at Waymark and creators of The Frost, a groundbreaking short film made entirely with DALL-E 2 generated imagery. For a bit of context on the AI journey that Stephen, Josh, and I have been on together, from 2017 to 2021, Waymark had built the easiest to use video creation app on the market. And the quality of the video templates that Stephen, Josh, and the creative team produced was our standout feature. However, feedback showed that users wanted more than an easy-to-use DIY solution. What they really wanted was an app that could create content for them. Now, I had been interested in AI forever and was always looking for AI tools to enhance our product, but I'd only done a tiny bit of hands-on development because frankly, none of the AI technology available at the time really worked for our purposes. That first started to change with OpenAI's release of GPT-3. And in September 2021, when we successfully fine-tuned the Curie model for the first time, I became convinced that generative AI was the solution. Some on the team, I think, thought that I'd lost it when I used my prerogative as CEO to pause just about everything else we were doing, up to and including board meetings, to organize a Generative AI 101 crash course for the team and reorient our product roadmap entirely around generative AI. Stephen and Josh, to their credit, came along for the ride and have since caught the AI wave in their own unique way. While I've got my 10,000 hours of AI usage with a mix of language, computer vision, and text-to-speech models, Stephen and Josh have gone super deep on AI art. We got first wave access to DALL-E 2 as an OpenAI innovation partner customer in early 2022, and since then, Stephen has personally generated over 1 million images with DALL-E 2. The result? The Frost is not just a proof of concept, but a legitimate 12-minute film with a coherent narrative and a consistent aesthetic. In this episode, we get a behind-the-scenes look at their creative process, a sense for the challenges they face and the strategies they use to overcome them. And overall, one of the most sophisticated accounts of the current state of AI art that you'll hear anywhere, from a team using these tools with the highest level of taste, vision, and skill. Creating The Frost was not easy, but this project does show how transformative generative AI is likely to be as it continues to mature. Only 7 people are credited on this film: Josh and Stephen, our Waymark team members, Tommy Herman, Zach Poley, and Lexi Dietz, and collaborators, Matt Sessions and Robert McFalls. As always, we appreciate your reviews and your online shares, but this time I really want to encourage you to watch the film itself, and also the trailer they've recently released for The Frost 2, which they are already making with an entirely new generation of AI tools. We'll have links to these in the show notes, and also to some visual behind-the-scenes content and an MIT tech review write-up of the film as well. Now, please enjoy this fascinating conversation with Stephen Parker and Josh Rubin, AI creative pioneers and makers of The Frost. Josh Rubin, Stephen Parker, welcome to the Cognitive Revolution.
Thanks for having us.
Very excited to have you both. Obviously, we've worked together for a long time at Waymark, where you guys have led the creative department and brought a level of creative quality to the work that we do that was certainly previously inaccessible to the likes of me. So, very much appreciate that over the years. But today, we're here to talk about your recent project, which you've done at Waymark, but, kind of for broader exploratory and creative purposes. and that is The Frost. So I guess for starters, tell us, what is The Frost?
So The Frost is a short film, 12 minutes, part one. It is a film that we created using DALL-E Images, essentially, which are still images that we prompt for, curate, and then take into After Effects, cut up, use puppetry, various styles of animation, run the images through DID, do a whole bunch of things to essentially create video from still imagery, and then assemble a short film out of that new quasi video. I would say that Josh probably has more to say about what The Frost is than me. He is the director on the project. But, it's just fundamentally about the exploration of what, new AI can enable for creators.
Yeah, I mean, The Frost was kind of a happy, wonderful accident. It was kind of born out of the curiosity to see if we can make a film generated completely out of AI imagery. And what I mean by film, it's more like not just like a montage of images set to music, and to see if we could animate them and to get the images looking as best as possible. I think there's a lot of people out there in the world doing that well, and doing that probably better than us. What I mean by film is like to create a narrative out of AI generated imagery. Could it be possible? Is it possible? We saw the text to image generations as like the beginning of AI cinema, which is the beginning of this whole new revolution in entertainment, really. And like, just, this is like, we just saw the beginning of it. And The Frost was kind of like an experiment put into action. And and then 3.5 months later and 13 minutes later, we had a narrative. We kind of, for better or worse, like we kind of we achieved our goal. So we're quite happy with it.
Yeah, it's been very well received. I think it's been really interesting to see how the sort of media has kind of taken an interest in the project, and what seems to capture people's attention most is this, kind of standard that you're speaking about, right? Where you guys really set out to do something that is not a proof of concept, but instead saying, given these new tools, can we create something that, we as creators and filmmakers would be proud of, and that people would actually want to watch, not as a pure AI curiosity, but as something that, hopefully stands up, against other entertainment on its merits, right? I think that's a key difference in the way that you guys approach this project relative to, so many things where people are like, look what I, kind of spit out, look what AI spit out for me. There's a lot more. I guess I don't really know a lot about your process, and I don't really, to be honest, know a lot about filmmaking in general. So maybe you could take us through the process and maybe highlight kind of to the degree that it differs from a traditional filmmaking process, obviously in many ways, especially at the kind of technical execution level where it does. But even maybe just starting at kind of the conceptualization, how different did this play out? How differently did this play out relative to a traditional project when it came to, just the first questions of like, what are we trying to make? What story are we trying to tell? Did you feel like you could start with the same questions, or did you have to approach it in a fundamentally different way given the different tools that you're going to be using?
I thought the genesis for the project was, I mean, it's a very different process from when you're kind of ideating a completely original piece without any kind of images to go off of, really. Normally you start with a script or an idea. You start with an idea, then it kind of evolves to the script phase, and then you kind of storyboard things out, and then if you're lucky, if you have enough money, then you get to shoot the thing, right? And you go location scouting, you choose your environments and your sets and scenes, and then you kind of go out and film it. And with DALL-E, it kind of gives you a great starting point. Like, it gives you some place to start. And whether you take to it or not, that's up to the creator. But what happened with our project was, Stephen was extremely excited about this new technology and just went gung ho in terms of generating all these fantastic, extremely photorealistic, cinematic images that really lent themselves to, just fantasizing about, hey, this could become a movie. And so it was easy, at least for me, to see, Stephen's initial Frost series, whereas I think it was a series of, 20 or 30 images. And from there, these images were faces and mountains and close-ups of gear and things like that. It's like it was the beginning of a world, and all it kind of needed was a story to kind of tie it into. So like we had this amazing starting point for this, which normally you don't get unless you're kind of drawing inspiration from a bunch of different things, and then you ultimately have to make it your own. But with, a DALL-E image generation, it gave us this incredible starting point that we could just hit the ground running with.
So let's dig in on each of those a little bit more. I think, people have seen a lot of cool stuff, I would say. Safe to say, if they're listening to this podcast, they've seen some cool AI art. Probably, though, it's often the case with different AI systems that you kind of, to a first approximation, kind of get out of it what you put into it, in the sense that if you don't have any vocabulary or expertise in an area, then you kind of get amateurish stuff out. And that seems to be true both on the image, creative side, and also on the language models as well, right? Some of the most creative and interesting projects in both realms are predicated on the person, the creator, really knowing deeply what they're doing. So I'd love to help people leave this conversation with a little bit better sense of like, how can they prompt for consistency or kind of create a world? When I go in there myself, I feel like, okay, I want an image of this. It doesn't really come out how I'm looking. I kind of mess around. If it's still not how it's looking, how I'm wanting it to look in my head, like I often just give up or I try something else. But to make, I don't know how many cuts there are in this 12-minute film, but it seems like, typically, whatever, every 2 seconds or something, you've got a lot of shots over the course of 12 minutes. And so to sustain an aesthetic for a full 12 minutes to make something that ultimately feels coherent, it seems like you really pushed on this frontier of consistency, predictability. So I'd love to hear kind of more about how you conceptualize that and the techniques that you and the team developed.
Right. So I think it's important to kind of imagine in your mind how you think these images were captioned originally. Because those captions are critical in the training of the data set and are kind of a fundamental first base for how to think about getting images. So before everybody had access, I was taking a lot of prompts from people, and people would just kind of give me random prompts, and I would help to improve those prompts, right? And they would say things like, I really want to get something that looks like a real photograph of a gray alien skull, and so they would just put gray alien skull into an AI image generator, and they would get back an illustration or a painting or something that, didn't look like a skull at all, or maybe it wasn't a gray alien. So I would say things to them like, hey, let's imagine this were real and there were a gray alien skull. Where would it be? It would probably be somewhere like Museum of Natural History, right? It would be in New York. And like, I want you to see it in your mind as that thing. And like, now we're going to prompt and we're going to say like the skull of a gray alien circa, 1946 or whatever in the Museum of Natural History. Something like that really sets up a kind of contextual framing for DALL-E or an AI image generator in a way that helps it to understand what are we going for, what are we looking for, and where might we find that thing. And so, if you were to imagine gray alien skulls being captioned also inside of something like National Geographic, right? Like, let's imagine there's a photograph of a gray alien skull held in a museum collection, taken in the 60s. Now we want to prompt for that image. That is really the way to think about achieving images for me inside of these generators.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamline accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind, so you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist, designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/cognitive. That's netsuite.com/cognitive to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/cognitive. Omneky uses generative AI to enable you to launch hundreds of thousands of ad iterations that actually work, customized across all platforms with a click of a button. I believe in Omneky so much that I invested in it, and I recommend you use it too. Use CogRev to get a 10% discount.
So if we kind of take that pre-context and then apply it to a production like The Frost, the first thing we really want to do is just kind of set up a contextual prompt structure that looks like, hey, what kind of image do you want? Portraits. I want portraits from the film. Then let's give it an imaginary film name. For The Frost, we called it Tundar, just because it's kind of a tweak on the word tundra and felt like something that wouldn't be in there, but was like pointed enough to kind of set the mood. So we want portraits from the film Tundar. Then we're going to add a comma, and Oxford commas are a huge part of crafting the prompt, if you will. But the next section is kind of like, okay, what are we shooting, right? So we're shooting people climbing a snowy mountainside, right? That's kind of the subject matter of the prompt. And then we put another comma and we say something like, filmed by various famous like Hollywood cinematographer or director. And now it's kind of like, okay, if you were to imagine the location of that image in a data set, maybe it would be in a blog post about a film, or maybe it would be in an IMDb kind of still or caption, or maybe it would be, there's tons of film sites, right? And so sort of like imagine the imaginary caption for this film image that is really kind of pointing to where that image might be hypothetically, and also kind of an art directed structure. We have a structure that's like, hey, I want this type of image from this imaginary project. Here's the subject I want in this particular instance. And then we can add additional kind of consistency information to the end. So maybe it's like always directed by the same director, or maybe it's not, but we always want like a consistent element to be in our shot, like the color yellow, or the colors blue and gray in the case of The Frost. And by setting up what I keep referring to as a contextual wrapper like this, we kind of have a frame around the subject matter. And now what we do is we go in and we play with that subject matter to kind of achieve different shots. So if you go look at The Frost and you think of it not as kind of like moving video, but just like one representative image from each of those video moments, that is, you could basically substitute that out for the subject matter portion of the prompt.
That's what helped us get the look of The Frost. There's a couple extra things that I think would help in continuity to answer that question. Like, that definitely helped us in terms of attaining that at times seamless look. The whole thing took place outside in the snow, right? So when we're cutting from shot to shot, that's an easy transition for your brain to make. Like, okay, well, in this shot, it might not be exactly the same background. Those tents might not be the same as it was in that reverse shot, but I'm buying it because there's snow and there's mountains. So that was huge. Like, kind of creating an environment that that was outside. Because once we got inside, that's a whole different ball of wax too. Also, another challenge with this stuff was that was to try and create like the cinematic continuity. And by that I mean just like, okay, just the fundamentals of a conversation where you have a shot and a reverse shot. And that kind of stuff was the most challenging. So once we had that look, then we kind of had to go back in and refine. Okay, that's when we had to kind of use our knowledge and apply it. Because it's like, okay, you can only have a certain amount of wide shots within a scene. You need to punch in, or you need more wide shots, or you need a different angle. You need a profile. You need this, and so like having that knowledge, like of filmmaking, essentially, was a great help, because that's what we, once we had our foundational shots, our big master shots that the teams created, then it's like, all right, how do we enter this world? How do we explore this world in a cinematic way, in a way that audiences are used to experiencing? And that's where like the real specific prompting came into play. And sometimes, and we got mixed results out of that. Sometimes we get exactly what we want, and then other times we kind of let DALL-E take the reins and got some great stuff there. So
right, I think that's a good way to think about it. Maybe for the audience, is like not so much me, but my team. They're really trying to get out there and dig up the raw materials. And by raw material, like think of cinematography, think of these shots. That's kind of my side of it. Then Josh's side of it is like making that into a film, like focusing on the story, figuring out like how to build a story out of those raw materials. And then we kind of get into an iterative feedback loop where, he's like, okay, this scene is working or this scene isn't working. I need more reverse shots here. Let's go take a crack at that. And then we try to go mine for some more of that type of shot and bring it back to him. And then, maybe it is working or maybe it isn't working. We need to make a tweak. Like, definitely the biggest thing in all of this, I mean, that's kind of like a standard flow, or could be considered a standard flow in terms of iteration around a project like this. But DALL-E or any AI gen is like kind of an artist on its own. It's almost like a cinematographer that you don't fully control. And I think what's interesting about all this is that, we talk a lot about these things, or we refer to them quite often as tools, but there's also sort of an artist component there. There's definitely an unknown with the AI that is just not fully within your control. And so we have to treat those AIs as if they were themselves artists, and sort of like be willing to be receptive to what they give us in the moment, on the day, in this shot or any other shot. And then see what we like, see what new ideas come out of that. That's definitely kind of the most new aspect of this, I would say, because in a typical production, you control everything. You go there, you art direct the scene, you set it up the way you want it, you have the talent you want, you've got a script exactly what you want them to say. Like, you may deviate here and there, as encouraged by the director, but fundamentally, like, you're in control. In the case of AI image gen, it's kind of like, it's much more like an active substrate that you're trying to sort of manage and mess around with in order to create something that fits into your project and works for you.
If this were real, let's imagine it were real, where would it exist? Who would have created it? How would it be described? So that you're not just starting off with, a kind of naive, purely descriptive thing, but you're trying to bring in all these other associations and kind of marshaling the vast knowledge base that the system can draw on. On the language model side too, and we've had a couple moments like this in the past where, I've been trying to use adjectives to get a language model to do something for me, like write better, copy, right, for our videos at Waymark. And then occasionally you'll say something to me like, why don't you tell it to make it like David Ogilvy wrote it? And then I'll be like, oh, yeah, that's quite a different approach, but in some ways way more powerful, right? Because I'm usually very like literal and kind of sitting there, much like your kind of, gray alien skull example. I'll be like, I want concise copy, and I want vivid copy, and I want memorable copy, and I want, all these sort of action verbs. And I'm kind of just giving it like a checklist. And you are instead invoking a master, which is, I think, something probably a lot of people could stand to benefit from in really any AI project that they're doing. So that's a bottom line that I think, people should definitely take away and incorporate into their own usage. There's this kind of iterative cycle. Not knowing a lot about filmmaking, to me, that sounds like pretty profoundly different, right? I mean, I imagine in some cases, especially with all sorts of technology that is used, you can kind of patch over things that you didn't actually film when you were doing the filming, later at the editing stage. But still, I also would imagine that like you're pretty limited in most cases by what did you actually capture when you were in the capture phase. And it's not easy, right, to go back and like reset up the set and bring the actors back together. So this fundamentally does kind of change the flow from one that is much more planned out in advance and kind of, waterfall, to use like a software analogy, to now one that is actually much more kind of agile and allows you to, to spin back to the raw materials anytime you want. Am I overstating how different that is, or is that really like a very different reality for making a film?
No, it's super different. I mean, you can punch in as sort of, as you were referring to, on various projects, whether it's audio or something else with video. But yeah, it's very expensive and time consuming to go back and shoot this stuff. How I would set it up though for the audience is like it's really a trade, because yes, it's very iterative. You can go back anytime you want. You can revisit shots, get new material, stuff that, would otherwise kind of cost you a fortune to go back and reshoot and rethink about. The trade, however, is like you're not fully in control. You still have to take those ideas again from DALL-E, from Midjourney, from whoever. And yes, you're getting more, but you're also getting more, again, that is not within your control. And this is really where Josh, I think, has stuff to say about what that process actually feels like coming from the world of a traditional director to a newer project like this.
I mean, that was probably the most revolutionary, most eye-opening oh shit moment that I had during this project, was when we were in the cutting room. We had our stills. They were still yet to be animated. And, it's like, just like in any kind of creative process, you're kind of searching for more. You want to make it as best as the best it could possibly be. You're like, yeah, this is cool. And this shot is kind of cutting with that. And the music is hitting right. And like these two people are talking and it's a scene, but like, wouldn't it be great if this could happen? And then, in it, right, like you said, in a normal traditional production, even in animation, to go back to shoot is a luxury that that a lot of people can't afford to do. It's like you got to work with what you have a lot of the time, especially if it's already in the can. And with DALL-E, you can in real time say, all right, let's get this hand clutching this rope. That's gonna heighten the drama. We want this scene to be super tense, like when the person is, clinging for their life and has slipped off the mountain. It's like, okay, how do we heighten those moments? And we could literally engage the team for a prompt. They can get us back an image within 20 minutes. And then we could put it in the timeline, watch it down. And no, that's not working. The fingers are messed up, or, let's pull back even more, have them outpaint it like 2 times or something. That's it. Beautiful. And then you have your shot, and that's how the the polish phase happens. Really, it was just like that's how this thing became polished. And like I think as these models get start to develop even more, like we're just going to see the polish get even that phase just be faster and like be more exhilarating.
Yeah, in terms of practicality there, I think Josh mentioned the storyboard earlier, which we do use, but I think in our case, something that's different is ours is really an active storyboard, right? So we use just a whiteboard website that, all the team members can go and see simultaneously and kind of work on collectively. But, we kind of have a row for each scene and images laid out in sequence there. But, the images can be taken down and a new image gets put up, or we, make space and put a new image in. And those images are not like a hypothetical or concepted or like an idealized version of what we want. Those images are actually what we're working with. So we go through this active storyboard phase where, without worrying about the animation or anything else, we're just kind of worried about a sequence of stills. And I do think that's not totally different from like an animatic process or something, but it's nice to just be able to do that continually throughout the project. And so, as Josh was saying, like, okay, he's decided in the scene he really wants a tight close-up of somebody gripping a rope. All right, seems straightforward enough. But now, like, the variable part is that hand like masculine or feminine, young or old? What does that rope look like? Is it like, a sleek black mountain climbing rope of some sort, or is it like an old nautical rope from a ship, from the 1600s or whatever? And you really like getting all of it back at the same time, and you kind of have to decide like, what fits here. And obviously, you hope to like hone it and get more specific than that, but hopefully that kind of like helps to contextualize or provide an example for people of, even though you've ID'd this very simple thing, like all the variability that comes or like explodes out of that one maybe individual request.
When it comes to faces, the continuity of the characters through the movie, you had mentioned the tents, in the background can kind of change and you can kind of get away with it because, it seems coherent enough and people kind of, don't latch on to those kinds of details. But for things like the characters' faces, I would assume, first of all, a lot lower ability to slip past, the viewer when those things change or are kind of inconsistent from scene to scene. And that seems like it would be really hard to get consistent across, a bunch of different shots, a bunch of different contexts. So how did you approach that problem of getting these characters to feel coherent across all these different images when in fact, like, presumably they're being kind of generated from scratch each time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was stupid hard in the context of our project, to be clear, because we're working with DALL-E, because it's, back in time in terms of the tech. It like another like caveat for now is like, this is much easier now within Midjourney, which you can do either by blending images together, which will kind of give you a consistent character, or feeding it, like uploading an original image and then asking for like subtle variation on that image. It's still not perfect, but it's a lot easier today than it was then. In terms of back then, I think we really spent a lot of time banging our head against the wall. Josh in particular, just, yeah, I remember I was all the time trying to ask, like, couldn't we just kind of follow a group and like, let's make the story about the group so that we don't have to care too much about any particular character. But Josh was like, and I'm kind of twisting his arm the whole time in that direction. But, there was this one character, Dr. Ulrich, that he was like, look, we really need time with a few characters. You got to find some way to give me a consistent character. Like, and he was very amenable to many different possibilities for how that might manifest. But ultimately, the thing we kept coming back to is like this idea of an archetype, right? So I think not to be understated is just the prevalence and significance of archetypes within these image generators, right? You can think about a common archetype like a statue of the Virgin Mary that we've all seen 100 different times all over the world. DALL-E or any AI image gen has certainly like seen, a ton of those statues. You could also think of an archetype in terms of something like the Mona Lisa that's, essentially the same image, but, a million different times in the data set. There's a lot of different ways to think about this. But for the character of Ulrich, the archetype we set up is like, a gray-haired, Wiley-esque mad scientist in a white lab coat, with, long gray hair and glasses, something archetypical enough that, it's not the same person, but like if you study the faces, obviously the faces are changing, but the idea is really to kind of just establish continuity so that that character feels like the same character. Josh uses a lot of tricks there, but like at the gen level, we're really working with archetypes and thinking about it in that way, knowing that, again, we're not going to get the same thing. We're just kind of like in an address field of possibility for what the generator may return.
That was a huge thing with Dr. Ulrich, to try and get that character. There's a scene in the movie where, this Dr. Ulrich character is, making a speech at the United Nations, trying to save the world. And it's action packed. And when you're hoping to get action and movement and, and kind of meet the bar that's been set by, modern day editing techniques, it's like you kind of have to go there. You have to cut. You have to make cuts. You gotta move your camera. You gotta play the game that's been set in motion. So we found this tropey archetype of like the mad scientist. And then, at first I was like, yeah, it's not the same guy. And how do we get the face, transplanted onto this shot? And it's just like, it's not going to happen. Right. And it's like, but after a while, you take a step back from the project and it's like, you look at the scene, and when the voices, and the voice of Dr. Ulrich, was read, and that's a consistent voice, and the music is put into play, and I bought it. It's like, oh, it's the same guy. But if you look at it from shot to shot, it's not. Some of them look very different. One guy looks like Santa Claus, and he's, probably 30 pounds heavier. And the other guy is a little on the more trim side, and he's just got a couple different facial features. But, we're relying on that like suspension of disbelief that it's just like very prevalent in a lot of movie making anyways. So we were just really leaning on that with these characters, especially with that character, because he probably makes the most appearances. So that was a huge struggle, and I'm really proud of how that turned out.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I honestly had not studied it that closely, and I've watched it a few times, but in retrospect, hearing what you're saying now, it just kind of worked for me. Like I didn't really notice those variations or think twice about it, frankly. Human perception is actually kind of accommodates a lot of things. Like we're not really trained to be on the lookout for things like this. I mean, there's a really interesting, potential lesson here for kind of human AI interaction in general, right? That like certain things that we're not primed for are really easy to slip past us. We've got no prior context or reason to be on the lookout for a person to be like not the same person, from scene to scene. It just doesn't happen. So in reality, then you can actually slip a lot past somebody because their kind of prior, so to speak, on that happening is just so low that it has to be pretty egregious, I guess, or maybe not egregious might be too strong, but it has to be significant to get over a threshold where people would see it if they didn't specifically come in looking for that.
I think it speaks to the power of the story too. Not our story, but just the power of storytelling. And when people are engaged in a story, you could forgive a lot of things. You know what I mean? It's like there's how countless, Reddit boards dedicated to like, gaffes in movies, where you could see did you spot the boom in the shot? Did you spot like this actor wasn't the same actor as in this scene? It's just like a lot of that stuff we don't catch just because like if you're watching a story, you want to be engaged, you want to feel. And so like that did nothing but help our cause with this. It was a cool thing to see put into practice.
So going back to your comments about the shot with the rope, right? What kind of hand is it? What kind of rope is it? All these little details. How much of that are you accomplishing through iterating on a single image? Like people have, seen these kind of mask and fill techniques or outpaint techniques. When an image actually gets to the point where you're going to use it, how often is that something that like DALL-E spit out and you're like, great, we'll use it, versus, it spit something out, but then you went and, redrew the rope 5 times and, the hand 5 times. How much of that kind of image level, partial editing and reworking are you doing?
Quite a bit. I mean, most of the images have some, particularly with DALL-E, because, those images are starting out so small and then kind of scaling up from there in terms of the way the images are generated. You're often like going back and correcting an eye or, painting over hands or something in order to try to get a better result. The rope example is a quality example in terms of adding a new shot in that you want. But I think in many, many, many of the shots, there's just some aspect of it that you want to touch up or make different. Or, sometimes DALL-E just does crazy things, like it'll just throw a random object into the background. It's kind of a fun, like creative occurrence, but also when you're looking for consistency and there's like a steel palette or something in the background that just like has no reason for being there, then Josh is making notes like, get rid of this, please change this. Another example is like, okay, these outside shots are great, but I need a fire. Like, can I get some plumes of smoke? So things like that are happening all the time. And then in terms of like the real cheating Photoshop work that we're doing in this process, like the one thing we really needed was this sort of MacGuffin object. I think of it that way anyway. And it was this idea of a transponder that is sort of moving up the mountain with these characters over the course of the story. And so in order to achieve that, we went into DALL-E to first create that object, went through many, many, many sort of prop iterations on what that thing might look like. Once we had it, though, in a few different angles, then that is an example of an object that literally gets composited, or you can think of it as stitching it into various shots over the course of the film so that it's there, so that we have that kind of one little consistent object that can follow you through the film and sort of help add another layer of continuity.
Can you unpack that notion of a MacGuffin for folks that aren't familiar with it?
The MacGuffin is kind of the idea of an answer, an object, or as something that isn't really there. It's more the idea of it that's there. So I'm not exactly using it in the correct, like in the context that it would, most often be used in terms of like a film where people are searching for a thing. That's the MacGuffin. It's the answer. It's the object. They may find it or not find it. It kind of gives meaning to the story without providing like substantive meaning itself. The transponder is similar in that it's not a real transponder. It's not really there. It is something we're just kind of, stitching throughout the film. I think of it that way because like it's not really coming from the generator in place, right? Like we're putting it in order to add this kind of idea of consistency to the project. So maybe I'm equivocating a bit there, but it's how I think of the construction of the film.
So another kind of challenge, Josh had mentioned this kind of, shot and counter shot, or, was it reverse shot, characters in dialogue, you're going to kind of see over each one's shoulder, right? People can recall how that often happens in the movies and TV that they watch. It strikes me that, if you want to go back and like replace a rope, there's pretty good tools to do that, right? Where you can mask it out and try it again and, iterate on that. But for broader composition, that's obviously a lot tougher, right? You can't just like mask, at some point you're masking out the whole thing is like, the layout, the whole kind of composition of this, if it's wrong, it's kind of wrong. You can't just kind of locally change that. So how did you work on that? And how would you describe kind of what the tools can and can't do there, right? I mean, there's actually like benchmarks around this where people are like, can you, create an image where there's like, one blue circle and a red square, and the red, square has to be, below the blue circle, whatever, these kind of compositional, sort of somewhat stilted, but, clearly defined compositional tests. Yours are obviously much more kind of in the eye of the beholder in terms of whether they're going to pass or not. But I imagine that must have been a real challenge. And, what do you do to try to dial that in and get the hit rate up to an acceptable level?
A couple of things to think about there. One, it's always getting better, like the ability to prompt for unique things in unique situations, which I think is ultimately what you're getting at there, is all the time improving. So I would just put that up front. Two, Josh is asking for any number of things. He's not just asking for small like tweaks to a hand or a rope. Like he's very often saying like, I want a different background here, or, I like this character from the image. I want them combined with another AI image. And so that, there is kind of like some compositing happening at the level of like putting images together. If you want to think of them almost as collage, like from the DALL-E generated images, that's another way you can think of it. But then I guess like at an artistic level, there's multiple things happening as well. One thing is like sort of knowing what form looks like to begin with is going to give you a much better idea of where you should be, erasing, if you will, in order to sort of force a better image to arrive based on the amount of space you've taken away. And that is like also contributing to the available space to paint back in. So if you want to refine a form, thinking about it as an artist, there's like definitely a structure or a method of attack in terms of how you are in painting and out painting within an image. But then also you have to go back to the data set and think again to the data set. This is like, I remember we had a number of shots that were daytime shots that Josh wanted to see fires in. And they were like overhead shots of the camp. He wanted fires to be there. And it's like, if you just go do a survey of film or go do a survey of this type of image, like there just won't be that many examples of images that are like daytime with a brightly burning flame as well. Like you might get that at night, you might get that in other contexts. And so a lot of times it feels like you should be able to just ask for, object X, a fire right here in this place. But all of the informational context surrounding the place where that object goes is contributing to how the machine is going to paint into that space. And then that's also coupled with like the sort of contextual information that lives in the data set. There are other times like in the color grade of an image. I remember we had shots that were very, very, very blue, and we were trying to paint in something like a red scarf or a purple scarf or a yellow scarf. And like all of those colors, there is no way that after a film has been graded that color is going to show up bright in the final image. So there are many, many instances in film where like someone is wearing, a bright piece of costume or whatever, but after the grade happens, the color grade, those colors become much more faded. And so DALL-E is never going to paint in like an electric red or an electric purple into that scenario because it's never seen any examples historically in terms of the way lighting works in these images that is, going to give it any indication that should happen. That's an interesting mystery in terms of where we are with the training right now, is kind of like trying to twist the arm of these machines to like reach into new or novel spaces to create things where there really isn't great kind of pre-context around what those things should look like in the images. That also is a bit of a tangent, but like that's cashing out in many ways when you're interacting with these generators. If an idea is complex, well understood, but maybe like without pre-context, you're going to get a fuzzier image. It's almost like the machine is having to think about a lot of different things at once. And so like, you're really kind of getting something that's maybe a little fuzzy or maybe a little bit more painterly when there's a really clear idea of what that thing is, it's almost like, the image dials in to something more specific, much more detailed. That's a long way of saying all these things are kind of happening at the same time. And at an iterative level, we're kind of just listening to what Josh wants and doing our best to get that thing. But we also have to be conscious of what is possible in this image, given what it sort of already looks like, such that we don't step wildly out of bounds and make a novel request that's just kind of impossible for the machine.
I mean, I think this is another really fundamental point for different kinds of AI systems as well, right? It's like the notion of, can AIs have breakthrough insights? Can they have eureka moments? Can they suggest science experiments that are actually, worth running because there's enough insight behind it, that makes it a not previously kind of well-trod, hypothesis? In this case, can it create stuff that doesn't look like anything in the set? In general, my read is that's very tough and, almost vanishingly rare. Certainly, when I've looked for things like, can it come up with good science experiments ideas? With current systems, I would say not really. It can take a good science experiment idea and start to map out the steps, but I haven't seen any examples where it would actually give you a really good, science experiment idea up front. But I guess, so in the context of this image stuff, we have seen things like the avocado chair. How do you make sense of something like the avocado chair, which, maybe that exists somewhere out there, but, that's pretty vanishingly rare. I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to get a little bit better understanding of what are the kinds of never before seen things that it can do versus the kinds of, never before seen things that you're still feeling are impossible.
This is definitely at the forefront of a lot of different machine learning research and insight being worked on, yet to be developed, et cetera. I don't have the definitive answer on this. You're going to get lots of different answers from lots of different people. But I think there is important thinking within this realm of questioning. So the way I think about it and the way I appreciate these image generators the most is really celebrating the fact that there was a data set that contributed to them. I don't like to interact with these machines kind of apart from that thought and that appreciation. At a high level, this is really an exploration of human history that I feel like I'm taking part in. The way I think about that sort of metaphorically or hypothetically is by thinking about that latent space and thinking about kind of a 3D space where a lot of points exist. And I think of those points as sort of all the things previously created, all the things that exist within that data set. Another way to think about it is maybe a Library of Babel analogy, or a space where all possible things exist. But if we were to conceive of a thing like a space where all things exist, then the data set is only the things we've found within that space of possibility. And then what we're actually interacting with this generative approach is really the space between that set of coordinates. So to reframe it, within a space of all possible things, there are all the things we've found, and now we're interacting with the space between all the objects we've found. So in the case of the avocado chair, no, there weren't a lot of avocado chairs, but there are a lot of avocados, there are a lot of chairs. There are also a lot of avocado pillows. There's a lot of there's a ton of different chair designs that look like many, many things. Certainly many of them have been close to the shape of an avocado. And if I were thinking about the space between those points where an avocado comes close to a chair, probably that is occurring many, many, many times. The fact that a machine is able to, create an inference point between those two and manifest it as an image of a chair is not that surprising to me. And there are a lot of cool examples where that happens in ways that just we haven't thought of yet. And that's kind of where the novel happens here, right? It's what happens when we blend 2, 3, 5 points that we haven't really blended before. That's the sort of everything is a remix philosophy. That's the idea that, we're getting to new places by exploring the places where we've previously been. And there is great opportunity for that to happen. There are a ton of just purely abstract kind of artists who are producing novel, I would say, just by kind of putting unique concepts together. But I think that is very, very different from asking the machine to fundamentally travel outside of the space of points that we know about and get to a new point, a new location, a novel location. That really doesn't happen. And it's my understanding that that is not really the space we're working with when we interact with a Chat GPT, a DALL-E, or a Midjourney.
I still a little bit struggle with why can't the scarf be super vivid red, or just things like that that seem like that doesn't seem too conceptually crazy. Maybe it's more of just you only have so much a bandwidth, right? You only have so much data you can communicate to the model in your prompt, and so it kind of has to have. I don't know. I'm struggling though, because it's you can get avocado chair. Seems like you should be able to get that bright red scarf if you want it. Even if it's not super coherent with the rest of the shot.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in for a second. The pre-context, though, of the prompt is important there, right? In the case of an avocado chair, and really with any prompt, the less kind of specific it is, the more opportunity there is for what I would call open blending, just, intersection between points, or forced intersection. The more we contextualize it, the more we say oh, I'm looking for cinematic 8K portraiture from a hypothetical film, by this director or lit this way, within this context. We are triangulating into a tighter and tighter realm of the space, right? The avocado chair is a great example of, if I could pull from any image in this data set and put it together with any other image in this data set, in this mathematical mind of the AI, then a lot more freedom is available to me. And also, to be certain, the Midjourneys of the world are all the time doing a better and better job of being able to make ad hoc demands, even within context, for things like the bright red scarf in a very, very blue cast image. So that's kind of happening. It's happening through RLHF. It's happening through a bunch of other techniques for the type of images that get generated. And we are still developing and figuring out arm twisty ways to have these machines generate the sort of images that we want to see them generate. But I also think it's worth thinking about being in the space, vectoring into more and more specific places in that space, and then contextually what that means for what the AI sees in terms of its local area of what it might grab from. It still does cool stuff all the time, stuff that's really creative. I mean, DALL-E trolls with the Mona Lisa continuously, and I don't know that people know that if they haven't generated 100,000 images with it or something like that, or they're not looking for it. And maybe the developers toss that in from time to time as a prepend or an append to the prompt. I don't know. Maybe DALL-E just does it because it's seen the Mona Lisa so many times that it will throw the Mona Lisa in here and there. But in the case of DALL-E, Mona Lisa is really kind of a character, a ghost in the machine, if you will, that just shows up in all kinds of different places and contexts, maybe as a background character, as a photoreal version, as a photo bomb sort of character, in another instance as a drawing, as an illustration, as a sculpture. In many, many different scenarios, Mona Lisa just kind of pops up in the most creative ways. And that's just one example, but it is really, really fun and funny at times to see that level of creativity sort of coming from the machine. And that's happening all over the place. The suggestions that the AI is making through its lack of specific knowledge are also really, really cool. I see a lot of clothing that the machine conceives of that's kind of a mix of two different ideas. It's a button-down shirt like yours, but maybe it ends, right where that top button ends. And, it's a poncho from there on out, and it's kind of like, the machine has no reason to care. Even though we talk about kind of bias in these machines, at the art level, it's really willing to kind of mix and match and pull from so many different things that, like, it's really creative, it's really interesting, and it's really unique at times.
Fascinating. Okay, so just being somewhat mindful of time, I want to talk a little bit about the motion techniques that you guys used in this project. Then I kind of want to get a little bit of an update on like where you're going next. I understand there's a Frost 2 in the works, and as you've mentioned several times, the tools are improving, and the what's available is changing, and you're probably going to use significantly different tools and techniques for the second installment. So really interested to hear about how that's going. And then maybe just to conclude, we could kind of zoom out for a second and like talk about the big picture of what all this means for content creation in general, content consumption. It seems like it's going to have a significant impact. So I'd love to hear your speculations about that. But with that roadmap, tell me about the motion. One comment that we've heard from a reviewer is that the vibe of the film is, I'm quoting, grotesque and unsettling. And I think, that obviously plays nicely with the story that you guys are telling. I wonder to what degree that is kind of a, was that like an early, late 2022, early 2023 constraint where you were kind of like, hey, this technology is still kind of in the uncanny valley. Let's just make it, uncanny valley and grotesque and unsettling because it plays that way. Could you have made something that wasn't grotesque and unsettling? And I'm understanding that is in the motion layer. Correct me if I'm wrong with that assumption, but it seems like DALL-E 2, is spitting out pretty realistic, not uncanny valley images. And I'm guessing it's the motion layer that was kind of introducing this sort of this vibe. But correct my misconceptions there.
Yeah, the motion was a challenge, right? Because we had these very cinematic images that featured human beings, and human beings move a certain way, and human beings have appendages that look a certain way, and knees bend at a certain angle, and elbows bend, and fingers move, and sometimes DALL-E doesn't want to give you all of those appendages in anatomically correct places that would beget a traditional human movement. So we figured out quite early that our movement was, at least with the humans, the human characters, was going to be a very rudimentary look. It looked at especially with the climbing up of the mountain, that was probably where the motion was most evident and was going to be featured the most. You need to show them moving up the mountain. And that was done in a couple ways, which I can go into. But when we were using the DALL-E generated images, you kind of had to just go the coarse puppeteer way in terms of After Effects, literally taking an arm, moving it, very time consuming way, or a knee and moving it up and then down. And with and we leveraged our amazing animator. I want to call him out. His name is Matt Sessions. He's been working with Waymark for a long time, and he did a tremendous job, breathing life into this project with the motion. So I definitely want to call him out. We were playing into the characters. We had no choice. This is what DALL-E was giving us, and this is what we were working with. We were working with characters that might not have a hand or might not have a complete foot. So it's how do you animate that? You know what I mean? He's well, you gotta keep them climbing up the mountain, so to speak. So we were doing our best there. And also in terms of the climbing, we were really inspired by the Akira Kurosawa movie, The Blizzard, which is featured in the anthology piece, Dreams, which is just now being remastered, I think released this week by Criterion, which is really cool. But like in that piece, like the characters move a certain way. It's a very sluggish kind of movement that like we felt good about. Cause like, okay, like, you know, Kurosawa is doing this like up the mountain, like we can do it. So like it was a great inspiration to have. And also something that I was looking at when I was seeing storyboards come together and then I was seeing the early animations is like, it was just coming off as like, this is a graphic novel come to life. And, you know, sometimes you just want to see the graphic novel. You want to see the comic book just move a little. It doesn't have to be realistic. It doesn't have to be, you know, like in 24 frames per second movement. It just you want to see a little movement and like, and we're good. And that goes a long way. And that's kind of how we got that look. And, you know, whether it's grotesque or not, like that's up to the viewer to decide. I'm not going to comment on that. There's also different other motion animation that we set into play to really breathe life into this thing, to get the kind of scope that we wanted in terms of like a group of people moving up a mountain and not like really concentrate on moving every single appendage. It's like it would be too time consuming. We kind of we utilized a 3D models from Mixamo, which are basically like 3D characters that you can like buy and animate in a kind of a coarse way and like intersperse them throughout the frames. So like that helped us give us a little more fluid motion throughout.
So do you think you could have done like a different genre at this stage? You know, I'm kind of wondering like, what if we came back and said, all right, we want to do a romantic comedy with the same tech? Would that just be impossible given, you know, the sort of limitations of how realistic, you know, would it be possible to make somebody, you know, the object of romantic desire with this tech, or is that just not quite there yet?
I mean, maybe if you just want to do it as still images, honestly, like we can get something very photoreal, but I think like, you know, that's a very good question. Like I'll let Josh jump in, but I mean, my immediate reaction to romantic comedy is like, I can't think of anything harder to try to do, where like subtlety of facial expression, where like so many back and forths between people. Yeah, I mean, we're definitely afforded a lot of things by the genre, by the scope, by the kind of interest in world building that we had around the project. A much more character driven thing would just be really, really difficult right now.
I agree. I mean, one of the biggest challenges of this piece was to try and mine emotion out of these characters. You know, it's like we could get like really amazing, you know, photorealistic frozen nomads or whatever. And like, but they'd be, you know, like, for example, like when we were building the avalanche scene, like, all right, we need people in here looking up at, you know, up at the mountain. And sometimes it would just give us people looking up, you know, in, you know, like a romantic gaze, even though in our prompt, it was just like in utter terror. They are about to die, you know, panic, exclamation point, like trying to throw everything at it to try and like, you know, receive something back that resembled like a human being in distress. And sometimes like we just wouldn't get that back. You know what I mean? And we had to go in there and manually sometimes and, you know, tweak eyebrows, tweak lip position. And what's really cool, we started implementing at the very tail end of the project was, you know, Photoshop has like a little AI emotion element to it. So we were able to kind of tweak, you know, some facial stuff with using Photoshop and also some After Effects techniques as well. And also with Inpainting, you know, there's a lot of Inpainting in this, trying to get a smile, trying to get a frown, trying to get that. So I think, yeah, to answer your question, a romantic comedy might prove to be difficult. Now, I mean, there's this new tech that we're just starting with Frost 2. I don't know if we want to talk about that.
I want to talk about it if you're open to talk about it. And, you know, not to like spoil the story or anything, but just the fact of how fast things are changing. it hasn't been that many months, since you were doing the first version and released the first edition of this, and tools are changing, things are getting easier. So I would love to hear, what are the big advances that are making the second edition, different in terms of your process and different in terms of the possibility of what you can create. What are you using tool-wise, and what more can you create than before? Voice is another one too that I'm really interested in. I mean, we've seen, it seems like we're hitting some thresholds right now in terms of the viability of like deep fake voices, for better or worse. Would you consider a AI voice, for the next generation? I mean, there's a lot of different frontiers too that could be considered.
Josh just put together a trailer for the Frost 2, and I'll let him speak to all of the new tech therein. I think maybe just a short preamble there is we obviously started creating the Frost at a time when the tech to us was much more new. And then an interesting phenomenon working on the project is like we're totally eclipsed by the tech by the end of it, right? The Frost ended up being a way bigger project than we thought it would be initially. Like we imagined it as, just a couple minute piece to begin with, and then ended up with like a part 1 running at 13 minutes by the end of it. So we kind of have this thing where like our first pancake ends up also like being the whole brunch. And it's like, how do you do that effectively? It's a bit kind of like live iterate and react for us, over the course of time. But one of the things lately we've started to, I think, like become attracted to is this idea of the Frost as an IP, a recognizable IP or storyline that people hopefully at some point become familiar with, and then can watch sort of morph through these AI technologies as new tech comes along. And I think that's just, for us, we like that idea because the world of AI is kind of moving so quickly. It's like, you only kind of get one chance very often to see a thing, think about it, and then it's on to the next, 10 things on the day. So the idea of an intellectual property of some sort, a storyline that you can sort of follow along with and also experience new tech with is becoming a really cool idea to us. So I'll let Josh talk about that new tech.
Yeah, so for the Frost 2, we at least for the trailer and for a lot of our tests that we're running, we're using Runway Gen 2, which is basically a text to video model, which is something, that when we were making the Frost back in, starting the Frost back in January or December of last year, we didn't even think. It's like, oh, that's 2 years away, whatever it is. It's, at least I was thinking. But I mean, it's here. And I think like as we were finishing like cutting this trailer, as I was finishing cutting it, like they just released a newer version of Runway Gen 2, where instead of giving you a 4-second output, which is kind of limiting, it gives you an 18-second output, which is plenty of time to give any filmmaker to tell the story of a shot. And or a scene if you want to just keep that one shot running. So, or just like it's a tremendous advancement, and it seems like it's only getting better. But I mean, just interacting with that was pretty different in that the images were moving. We're no longer getting still images and then breathing life into them. Like the life is already being breathed into them. And so it's like there's with that comes more issues. It's like, no, well, now this person's head is, resembling a tomato more than it is like a human head. And yeah, we can't use that shot anymore. So it does different weird stuff, It's like you're encountering different little weird quirks that it has. But like, I feel like that'll get ironed out. And like, as we work with it more, we'll be able to kind of articulate our best practices there. But yeah, it's just super exciting to have worked with that.
So the new technique is now just straight text prompting with Gen 2. That's the focus at present. Yeah, that's interesting.
There's also images involved in those prompts at times too, which, It's cool because like you can go over to a DALL-E or Midjourney, like craft sort of the image that you want Runway to use in order to create that scene. And now you can do a couple of things. You can just do a pure text prompt. You can do that image plus a text prompt to sort of like ask for the type of movement you want, or you can just use that image only and just see what Runway spits out as a result of that image. So it's kind of three things available to you there. Now, Inpainting, as Josh was saying, like inpainting, outpainting, these things are, I mean, they can be done, rotoscoping can be done, but like it's way more taxing to do that than typically to just kind of like prompt for another generation. So there is kind of less flexibility at the level of video output, but it's kind of we're building a flow now where we're sort of like achieving the image first, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, and sort of using that as a starting point for the generation of these clips. You also mentioned AI voice. Josh, you are using AI voice.
When we were voicing Frost Part 1, we auditioned a ton of AI voices just because there's so many different characters, and it's like, it's a job to go in and audition people, hear different clips from people reading lines. It's a thing. And so we were hoping to maybe employ some AI VO, and it just wasn't happening. It didn't sound real. It was too quirky. It was too robotic sounding, whatever. But now during, our time with the Frost 2, it's just like the advancements are significant, especially applying them in a dramatic context. I don't know anything about like anything outside of, a drama, but within this dramatic context, it's like some of them really, really excel. So yeah, we were blown away.
What are the tools that have jumped out to you the most right now in the AI voice?
I like 11 Labs.
Their pro voice clones are insane recently. I have been just amazed by that. I'm waiting for mine. Then I can, delegate the whole podcast adventure to the AI as well. Also, Play HT, former guest on the show, they just released something in the last few days that I think we really want to check out too, because man, it is, to be able to prompt emotion on top of just the text. I don't know if 11 Labs has that. You can tell me if they do, but the ability to go in and be like, this is said in anger, versus said in surprise versus whatever. I mean, just a whole new layer of control that has just, as far as I know, just come online with their last release. So it's, your toolkit is expanding exponentially right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a side note, but like it is really, really nice as artists to start to see these tools begin to incorporate more of a tool set that we need in order to kind of like get emotion out of things. And, like Josh was talking about trying to mine for emotion inside of DALL-E. I really think a lot of that is like a lot of the emotion has just kind of been RLH stuff, like to death out of these data sets. And it's understandable at the level of like, creating images that feel scary to people, faking real world events, disasters, that sort of thing. But like at the level of drama or action movie or sci-fi, like you need people to look scared at times. You need to be able to put explosions into the scene. You need people to sound angry in their voice delivery or happy. You need them to be able to cry, argue with each other, love each other. Like the full range of human emotion and visual expectation, like we need that as artists in order to create effectively with these tools. So I think like we're starting to see it. There's a delicate balance there. I can understand like why it's not there initially, but we're spending so much time talking about what's in these data sets. We don't really spend a lot of time talking about what artists really need in order to like get the full range of capability out.
I think that's maybe a good place to transition to the last thing I wanted to ask you guys about, which is just the broad future of all this stuff. I mean, obviously for context, we've got multiple Hollywood strikes going on right now, writers and actors. And in general, people are, kind of expecting a lot of disruption in this space. I think, you could look at that from the standpoint of production, what roles, become more or less important. How does the mix of jobs change? How do the budgets change? I think it's also really interesting to consider like what gets created, and how does that change? I think an important point that our good friend and CEO Alex always says is like, we just never would have done this, otherwise, right? Like we didn't have the budget to do the traditional production and never would have dreamed of it. So this is something that just simply could not and would not have existed before. And that's an important, an additional layer to bring to the whole thing, because it's not just about the way things are produced changing, but also what can be produced changing. But there's just so many different, fallouts from this: economic, cultural, atomization, perhaps, of people kind of falling into their own. I mean, we're already, very concerned about echo chambers and information silos and, algorithms, curating content just for you in a way that, may or may not always be healthy. But it seems like there's also, a lot of potential for things to be created, just for you in the future. So how, you guys have been really at the forefront of this. And I wonder what, if you try to peek around the corner, beyond Frost 2, but kind of extrapolating that to 3, 4, 5. But, where do you think this goes? Or can you even, predict that at this point?
I mean, a few things there. We did this for fun. We're not a film production company. We're a technology company at Waymark. We're, our mission is fundamentally about people being able to make their own commercial. So we were able to pursue this project really as a luxurious byproduct of the fact that we're out there kind of looking at new tech on behalf of our customers and trying to figure out, what the best ways there are for us to like incorporate this stuff and to be the best practitioners we can, so that, when we do have times where we need to like construct a prompt or something in our own workflow, in the case of our customers, we know how best to do that, right? So this is really about us kind of understanding what's possible, and that's really like what got us to the Frost, and what gives us this kind of fun area to play in. That said, like, because this is fun, because this is not for profit, because this is kind of just, to share and hopefully share a lot of knowledge as well about, the creation and the process. My own opinion is just kind of like, I think there's still room for a lot of things. There's still kind of like room for all of us. The tech is certainly going to transform roles. It's going to create a lot of new, cool and interesting roles that we haven't thought of yet. It's going to enable, much, much smaller groups of people, the pursuit of these projects. I would like to think of that as a lot of people without means previously to become filmmakers or do things creatively, or, going to have the capability to do that very, very soon. And I think that is a very exciting idea. I also think some jobs are going to go away. Certainly, that's kind of just the reality of technology. In our world, that's kind of couched at the level of artist. I don't necessarily think I buy into that argument so much. I think like, yeah, maybe if you have only one modality of art creation and you never plan on expanding that or trying something new, then okay, like that, there's going to be issues for you down the road. But if you embrace these tools and think about, the use of them in your own workflow, I think just about every artist can find something cool and find new paradigms and new possibilities for themselves. I think, the ability to fine tune now in AI on your own work. If I were, an individual fine artist who maybe hasn't given this a shot yet or hasn't really thought about it, the idea to go fine tune on your own work and then kind of explore with the AI within the sort of realm of what you're already doing sounds like a very new and exciting thing for me to think about. Also, when we prompt for things like a specific artist or a specific production type, we're only kind of getting an amalgam from the AI that's based off of a myriad of things that's seen in the data set. We're getting results back that like have an artist noted properly. We're also getting results where an artist isn't noted properly. And so like we're really getting a melange that like though it may say one artist like represents any number of people. And in the case of film, like is representing, everyone from screenwriter to grip to just armies of people untold that are represented there in the data set, but are not like equivalent to the artist name that someone might put into a prompt. So I think that is an important thing for us to consider and then maybe to build on. Like I'm excited about the idea of directors coming along and authoring definitively a fine tuning that other people in society can maybe purchase or license the ability to use, what they like, exactly what they wanted the machine to understand their artist thumbprint as, and for people to be able to like mix and match those definitively authored fine tunings with others. I think that is a new kind of like economic explosion potential that I'm really trying to talk about right now more openly and be a big advocate for, because I think that is maybe like a healthy new world where artists and creators can intersect and find a lot of benefit. And then last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, is just that in terms of what I put out into the world versus what I've created, I'm going to hit 1 million images generated this year, here in about 2 months, running my numbers. I put out a small fraction of that into the world in terms of what I let people see. That's okay with me. I have my own like worlds that I explore my own kind of stories I enjoy by myself. And that is going to happen for a lot of people in a lot of ways going forward. And I think we can just kind of try to be a bit more understanding about that and appreciate that for what it is.
That's a hot topic right now. I have friends and family in Hollywood who are, worried about this and ask me about it all the time. So and it's definitely controversial. I can tell you from my experience that, directing this movie and trying to see this production through, this is not easy. This stuff, it was exceptionally hard, maybe even harder than like a traditional animation. It just because of you're working with an unknown artist in the room who can give you exactly what you want, or who can give you some random wonderfulness or some, as other people say, grotesque image. And so it's a huge challenge. And I do believe that like there are still going to there needs to be a, in order for it to be good, I think, like a human vision. There needs to be like a big 500-foot vision that a human being has. At least I'm talking about making a narrative film. I don't know how far away we are from that, but from where the human being is not engaged at all. But because right now you can't really just ask ChatGPT to write you a screenplay, feed that screenplay into another AI, and then all of a sudden you have a movie. It's not really how it works. There's a lot of tweaking. There's a lot of human conversations. There's a lot of, critical thought that needs to go into this thing. And so I think it's a great tool, and it's improving every day. So, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, that might happen. You might be able to type in a prompt and get your ready-made movie. But right now, it's you still need the human to kind of be the storyteller, in my opinion.
Well, the AI assisted enabled short film that you guys have created is The Frost. It has been reviewed all over the place on the internet. You can watch it on YouTube, and we will certainly be keeping an eye out for The Frost 2 with a whole range of new techniques and look forward to continuing to follow your work as you guys continue to pioneer what it means to create truly high-level content with AI. This has been a ton of fun, guys. Josh Rubin and Stephen Parker, thank you for being part of the Cognitive Revolution. It is both energizing and enlightening to hear why people listen and learn what they value about the show. So please, don't hesitate to reach out via email at tcr@turpentine.co, or you can DM me on the social media platform of your choice.
Omneky uses generative AI to enable you to launch hundreds of thousands of ad iterations that actually work, customized across all platforms with a click of a button. I believe in Omneky so much that I invested in it, and I recommend you use it too. Use CogRev to get a 10% discount.